We are in a transition of what was and what will become.
Overnight, historic and dangerous cold taking aim at millions.
A mega drought and record high temperatures are fueling wildfires
what's happening in Cancer Alley as environmental racism.
Racism's role is to keep the extractive economy extractive.
One of the great successes of capitalism is separating us from our neighbors.
Reimagine a now where environmental justice leaders come together to restore our ecological relations, while also centering justice and creatively design our systems and infrastructure for the future.
Putting people who are the most impacted by that set of intersectional issues at the center of both leadership and the solution.
Solutions that will impact millions for generations and converge at the point of impact, relation, and scale.
Being able to be in community with other people is what gives you the courage to imagine something totally different and to fight for that.
Thank you. It's so good to see so many of you here. Some new faces, some familiar faces. Thanks for making the time in your day to join us. Let me introduce myself. I'm Angela Maecha. I'm the director of the Right for Creative Disruption Environmental Justice Movement Fellowship. I come out of organizing for many years, decades almost, with many movements at the intersection of climate justice, environmental justice, food justice. And the fellowship itself is housed at the Tishman Center. So the Tishman Environment Design Center has historically done some really incredible research and policy for everything from, incinerators and landfill information for community groups to some of their more recent work around the Justice 40, definitions around environmental justice, the intersections of philanthropy and EJ and climate justice and equitable resourcing. And so it felt really good to have this fellowship, which is driven by years of consultation with the movement and the center faculty and staff, and present what we're talking about today. So thank you all for joining. We had 80 people sign up, 80 plus people sign up. So you'll see people kind of come on. But before we get too far, so we can wait and see if more folks will join us, I'm gonna pass it to Maru and Trish, who are also playing a role and have a position in the staff.
Thanks so much, Angela. Welcome, everyone. I am sharing my screen, so I can't see your faces, but I did recognize some of the names on the registration form. So it's so great to be in the space with some of our current partners and also lots of new faces as well. So thank you so much for making the time. I'm a program manager here at the fellowship, and I'll be sharing a little bit more about the application process a little later in our time together. Thank you all so much.
Thank you, Maru. My name is Patricia Cortado. I will be handling the tech for today. So if you have any questions about tech stuff, please feel free to message me on the side. I am the Program and Communications Associate for the fellowship. And before we actually get started, I would just like to start with some housekeeping rules. So before we begin, please make sure that your audio is muted, but we encourage you to keep your video on. To change your display name and add your pronouns, please click on the participants in the bottom menu to find your name and select rename. Let me just admit a couple more folks in. And to ensure that you're always seeing the person speaking in the top right-hand corner, please select the speaker view so you can see those who are speaking. And to access live captioning, click on live transcript /CC in the bottom menu. It'll all be in the bottom menu. Some are on the right bottom part of the screen. We will be recording today's informational session. It will be posted on our website later this week. And for tech questions, once again, please feel free to message me on the side. There will be dedicated time for questions and answers, so you can put your questions along the way. But I guess let's continue. And I would just like for folks to introduce themselves in the chat. Please put down your name, your pronouns, your org, land acknowledgement. I'll also put it in the chat for those who are not able to hear me right now. I'll pass it on back to Angela for our pop.
Hey, I'm in the city, so you can hear the noise in the background. So yeah, it's just so we're grounded here, right? There's a lot of information on the Ripe for Creative Disruption Fellowship on our website, and Trish and Madhu are all going to be putting up a lot of links on the side. The session's also going to be recorded, as Trish said, so you'll be able to access a lot more of the details. We're going to kind of go really quickly through some of the purpose, the experience itself, just so that we're making sure we have time for questions. So you have more pointed questions about what you want to know and how you want to kind of come into the application process. This call is really to orient around the application process itself and the overview of like why this fellowship now, where are some of the origins of it, and then share some details on the 4 main areas of the questions that are going to form the application rubric. Again, it's really great to see your faces and those that we can only see you offline, you know, without your video. It's also good to see your names calling in from all across the country, from Turtle Island. I see some friends from Puerto Rico, folks from Guam. Let me see. So yeah, we're going into slide 3. If you want to start following, just if you're more of a visual learner, sometimes the slides really help. And so let's get grounded, right? So the fellowship is something, like there's so many fellowships that are out there, and most of them are oriented towards individuals. And so if we're thinking about the purpose of this particular fellowship, and sometimes the language is like jolting, right? It's like community ship. It's about developing space for core groups to come together and design and redesign, and then put out solutions that have had time to be digested. And it's part of our frameworks, and it's part of the learning that we had with community to develop it. It was clear that our systems are going through this transition. And for a lot of folks that are on the call, very familiar with the Just Transition framework derived by the Climate Justice Alliance, Frontlines and Movement Generation, and others, that this transition seeks justice and is moving us towards a living economy. And that living economy has aspects of decolonialism, strong aspects, feminist aspects, liberation practice, and regeneration. And for a long period of time, we've been shifting narratives, we've been shifting frames and our networks to orient towards this new regenerative system, economy, you know, world, if you will. And in that practice, we are realizing, and this is what we heard from the landscape assessment we had with more than 100+ leaders, is that we need more time to be able to craft the solutions, test the solutions out, and build these structures that go beyond our organizations. So this fellowship is kind of at the intersection of responding to the state of the movement, where we know, and we start with the premise that environmental justice leaders are at the forefront of the just transition we need, right? The work is already happening on the ground. And that we need disruption or some level of opportunity in this political context for us to make this shift into this new system, this new economy, this regenerative practice that we can be in, that comes after the just transition. And for a very long time, we've been in this struggle of defining the just transition, of developing solutions, of fighting the bad, and starting to build the practice of building the new, even if that means maybe going back to radical indigeneity, liberation practice, to kind of come to this new system that we're designing. And so at the heart of the fellowship, as you're kind of getting introduced to it and starting to kind of live it out with your practice and your vision, the real design question that we have here is like, how do we decolonize design to do things differently and to do different, impactful, scalable things that not only meet the urgency of the moment, but kind of surpass it, right? It surpasses the political, ecological, and social moment that we're in to really give texture to the regenerative economy. So some of you might be like in the middle of doing that already. Let's go to slide 4. And so the purpose of the fellowship is really to support and grow that capacity as movement leaders to design that innovative, disruptive strategy or that disruptive approach, opportunity, and then transform and redesign the climate agenda, the systemic agenda. And that could happen at many different levels, depending on where you find yourself in that story of climate justice, environmental justice. So in preparation for the fellowship, we've consulted with like hundreds of leaders. This kind of started out in 2018. And in 2018, Dr. Ana Batista was consulting with the movement. Dr. Jasudison was also consulting from the movement, and they brought together this like policy research component with the design component and prototyping component to develop and have conversations with the movement. And what's coming out from the movement, both from the landscape assessment, we had a couple of panels, we had EJ leaders come together in workshops, and then we've developed an advisory committee, is the 4 areas that we're focusing on, at least for the pilot, is climate justice, environmental health or public health, just transition, and energy democracy. And if you look at the slide, you'll see other areas that came up. It's not that, Indigenous practice and knowledge isn't important. It just didn't surface to the amount, or maybe it intersected in different ways, or, voting rights or worker rights. All those things did come up. Issues also came up, capacity building, trust, healing, a lot of what, we've been hearing and needing in this moment in time of crisis. And then strategies also were elevated, and that is part of the design process. So we're answering a couple questions as we're coming into this together, not saying that we have to find the answer in this pilot, but this is the direction that we want to have a long-term orientation to learning, unlearning, and co-learning together. And that's like, how and where can we support leaders to generate new and disruptive alternative strategies? And that could be short term, that could be like super immediate, to the longer term. Maybe you're thinking about 30, 50, 100 years from now. And then the next thing is like, what knowledge and skills and capacity will leaders need to generate, sustain, and implement these transformative possibilities? And part of that question is resources, and the other part is relationships. What kind of shifts in relationships do we need to have and be a part of or envision to support you all as leaders in that work? So we're going to slide 5. And so that's why in this orientation, we're definitely focusing on collective leadership. There's something happening in the world right now where there's openings and then there's things dismantling. And so we're clear that we have to go beyond our organizations to resolve some of these things. That collective leadership is actually the model that we need to be engaging in to deal with the complexity of our crisis and also the opportunities. So this would be for groups of 2 to 4 leaders, right? So we're trying to do it to a way that we're holding space so that we can go deep into the discussions and the practices over the next 2 years. Mentioned the focus of area, right? Climate justice, just transition, energy democracy, environmental health are all kind of subsectors of the environmental justice movement. This year is 30 years since our first environmental justice POC conference. And so I think there's questions that come up around that. And I know we had a poll we were going to do, and see if we can have time around that. But we want to be able to also experiment at many intersections, right? We've talked about disruption a lot, and there's like light and shadow to disruption. But what's clear and what we have learned is like, you have to disrupt to be able to then engage in a new direction. And that design plays a really strong element in being able to design that disruption to last. And something the movement as a whole, we've been experimenting with in terms of intersection is how to bring together place-based solutions and the scalability of those place-based solutions, be that translocal or in other ways of bringing what we learn at the very local level into a greater realm of possibility. And I often talk about the fellowship as being, you know, this is like the movement really occupying academia. So even though we are housed at the new school and we come out of the Tishman Center and, you know, have that, all the work is very much housed in communities, and the folks that are coming around the fellowship come from movement. And so we're in this place where we're experimenting at these intersections, knowing that decolonializing our way of learning is going to be an important part of interacting in this first phase. And then I'll say a couple more things before we go into like the fellowship experience itself. And that's there's an orientation in this moment and in the fellowship about focusing on a problem. Oftentimes, you know, frontline communities are faced with not only fighting the back, but also figuring out the solution, and doing that at a really ridiculous, you know, timeline. And so the fellowship is designed to kind of elongate the timeline so that you could really focus on the problem and the opportunity, the approach, and do that with like leaders that you love and respect in the movement. And so I'll say a couple more things now moving into the fellowship experience. And just as a reminder, you know, I'm talking a lot here on this side, but we want to make sure you all have a good context of like the why. Is if questions come up for you, feel free to kind of put them up, like what Trish said, up on the chat, so that you don't forget what's coming up for you. And we'll have like the question and answer section a little bit further into the presentation. So that's, you know, those are like the snippets of why. You know, there's a lot there, there's a lot of context there. And like I said, there's a report, there's research behind it, there's workshop recordings, those things you can find on the website if you want to learn more about the why, or if that's resonating for you and you want to dig deeper into that element. So as you're thinking about the problem and you're going into the application, figuring out, okay, I have a core group that I'm working with perhaps, or want to work with. And we go into the fellowship experience, maybe we take just a moment break and ask you all, right? What do you think is the greatest kind of impactful EJ contribution to these times? And or failure. Maybe you're thinking, hey, these moments are like further than we ever thought we would be able to have solutions for. So you can maybe in the chat, we take a break before we go into the experience itself and say, you know, what has EJ contributed in terms of impact to this moment in time, and or what are some failures that we're learning from EJ for this time? You can just write it in the chat. We got some silence. And this is really your opinion, right? Like you're not being asked to assess the movement as a whole, but in your experience. Hey, Jamie, you wanna just get off of mute?
Hi, all. Thank you for having this. Can you hear me well?
Yes.
Cool. I would say maybe it's not necessarily a failure, but I think something that the movement has a tendency of doing is, you know, spotlighting one individual and like praising them and celebrating them. I think we saw this with like Greta, for example, when we all know that anything worthwhile is done together as a group. collectively as an organization. And so I really love that feature of this fellowship where you already have to be part of an organization, as opposed to just an individual who may have, you know, their own personal pursuits.
Thank you. Thank you. Some really good stuff is also coming up. Yes, thanks. I'm gonna name a couple more. I saw Jeremy put here, failure to really deeply engage young people in the movement until fairly recently. The greatest impact, Janae, what's up? Greatest impact in shared language around just transition, you know, greatest failure, lack of inclusion of Afro-Indigenous communities. Some really well thought out things. And I wanted to bring this before we go into the experience itself, is because, yeah, and keep putting those things up so you all are also looking at what you're putting up for each other, not just to answer the question. But the fellowship is really oriented towards learning from failure, right? Learning from the experience of these last 30 years and being able to build on that through the unlearning of, right, excluding Indigenous practice or excluding Black communities, or, you know, trying to figure out the relationship between the Greens and the environmental justice movement. And so these are all these kind of larger mindsets and frameworks or worldviews are going to be explored in the first phase of the fellowship experience. So to be clear, the experience itself is 2 years long, right? We've heard that we actually need that long to be able to process. And it's not that we're going to be consistently together for 2 years, but there are certain interventions that we make. You know, we come together, then you all share in your core group. Thanks y'all for continue to put things in the chat. Each of those phases are 6 months each. And so we're looking at being able to hold a total of 16 people, right? So that's about 4 to 8 groups, depending on how many groups and the quantity of people in the groups. Fellows will also be able to participate in a combination of virtual and in-person retreats. So it's not all in person, and we're also exploring and know that people need to stay virtual for some time. And some of the things that are really exciting is that we're providing a lot of space for relational and resource support, right? So if you're coming in saying, okay, this is a really great funding opportunity, you're probably going to do more work than you would for a regular grant. So I wouldn't recommend that being your point of entry. But if you're really trying to figure out like your place and provide input to the movement as a whole, then this is more of a community building opportunity where you're testing out some of the things you've already learned as an individual movement leader and taking it one step further. So I'm on slide 7, and then I'm going to pass it to you, Maru, so we can have that time for question and answers. So through the application process, right, it's going to ask you, like, do you have a group already? You know that this is for group participation. And it's also going to bring together the dates. So it's good to look at the dates of these 4 phases, right? It's like 2 years down the line. We're kind of planning through October of 2023. And we start with the leadership mindsets, the reimagination, the need to reimagine solutions, the need to design them in collaboration, and then the contemplation of what power and scale means for those solutions. And we'll have key contributors. So it's a mixed process of having kind of a lead facilitator that really understands the depth of design process and the intersection with environmental justice, and a number of key contributors from the movement itself. So you'll see a number of, historical leaders and emerging leaders participate in the fellowship. And we can come back to some of these details in your questions as we need. And we also know that like access is something we're really concerned with and want to hear from you all about in your applications process, and we're making space for that. And we also understand that these are uncertain times, and so that we're making also space for what we need in terms of in-persons versus virtual, and what it means for our family from different territories, different places with different circumstances to be able to also participate. So I'll pass it to Maru, so kind of start bringing you into like the application itself.
Thanks so much, Angela. Yeah, so I know we definitely want to leave a lot of time for your questions. And so I will work through some of this material a little fast, but all of it is on our website, and Trish is putting links along the way. So there's a lot more details on our website and some of the supplemental documents that we have. So definitely check those materials out. And also at the end, we'll talk a little bit about next steps. So if you still have questions, how you can get back in touch with us after the session as well. But just really quickly about our application eligibility requirements for the application, which is, so these eligibility requirements, and when I go into the application a little bit more, were developed with our advisory committee, our key contributors, advisors, and staff. So we've gotten a lot of input. And in terms of building and selecting these eligibility requirements, we really wanted to emphasize, as Angela said, like accessibility and limiting barriers to applying and to participating in the program. And so because it's a 2-year commitment, that can be intimidating. And so we understand that, and sort of just want to also just really encourage folks to, like Angela said, like it's not consistent over the 2 years. And so we really do want to hear from you all in your application and throughout this process on like how we can make things accessible to get really like build a great cohort. And so, like I said earlier, we really wanted to emphasize limiting the barriers. So even though this is like a text heavy slide, it seems like there's a lot of eligibility requirements. We actually wanted to keep things pretty broad. And so number one is, we've said a few times that we're looking for groups, which is a little different than what fellowships usually are looking for. So we're just going to take a moment here to just get a temperature check of you all, like online right now. We'll do a quick poll just to see where you are. Do you have a group? Are you searching for a group? Are you just here to learn more? So we'll just take like maybe 90 seconds to do that poll, and then I'll go into a little bit more of the eligibility requirements as well. So let's see if I can do 2 things at once on Zoom. I'm going to stop share for a moment to do this poll, because I think that that'll be a better experience for everybody. Let's see. Okay. All right, so you all should see that poll going on your screen. And if you want to start just letting us know where you are in your process of forming a group today. Wow, you all so fast. We're already up to like 85% participated. So I'll give folks a few more seconds, maybe like half a minute more. Okay, 10 more seconds, and then I will close it. Okay, thanks everyone. So let's share these results. Can you all see this on your screen? See what I'm saying? Great, so we have a good mix. It's awesome to hear that there are some people on the call who already have a group formed, and a few that are in the process of forming. We have some curious folks who are just here to learn more, which we love, and we encourage you to keep in touch. And if you're seeking a group, I would just, encourage you to sort of see what you can pull together this round. And if you can't form a group, definitely keep in touch. We'll talk a little bit at the end about our social media page and website and newsletter and all of that. So we encourage you to keep in touch with us, even if you decide not to apply this round. So thanks everybody. It's great to see where everyone's at. And then, so if we go back to the eligibility requirements, just a few other things to note, which is, as Angela mentioned earlier, we are looking for folks who are working in the 4 focus areas that came out of the landscape assessment. So climate justice, environmental health, energy democracy, and just transition. We're highly encouraging that BIPOC, LGBTQIA+, low-income and women leaders are encouraged to apply. And then there's a few other requirements that, again, are pretty broad, but we're hoping that they help us, they're all in service of building a cohort that's really cohesive, but also open to like learning with one another, and also diverse enough that folks are learning different things from one another, and that everybody's sort of bringing something new and fresh to the table as well. And so part of the requirements is that you're part of a grassroots organization. The focus is on that's actively engaging in environmental justice or climate justice movements. And that doesn't mean that it has to be an environmental justice program. The focus is on environmental justice, but we are welcoming applicants from other allied social movements. And just so you know, being part of an organization doesn't necessarily mean that you receive a paycheck from them. So you don't have to be a staff member. You can also be a volunteer, a board member, or advisor as well. And that would count as being part of a grassroots organization as well. And like I said, in sort of like building a cohesive cohort, we are looking for folks who are committed to collective and collaborative leadership. We hope that if you're applying, that you're aligned with some of our goals and our values. And that also includes practicing, uplifting the environmental justice principles of working together and the HEMESH principles of democratic organizing. And then finally, just a few things that we hope you can just check off really quickly, which is that everyone's 18 years or older in your group, that your work is based in or substantially focused in the United States, indigenous communities on Turtle Island, and other affiliated, US affiliated territories. And that finally, as Angela mentioned, because we are emphasizing relationship building and community so much, that you are able to participate in all of the fellowship activities, which include the retreats, the coaching sessions, and the in-between prep and group work. And so if for some reason you're not, like if you're able to, attend like 8 out of the 9 retreats, there is space on the application for you to share a little bit about any accessibility barriers or sort of like scheduling conflicts you may have when it comes to those fellowship activities. And then finally, because we know people wear several hats, you can apply as part of multiple groups, and there will be space on the application for you to signal if you are applying as part of multiple groups, just so we keep that in mind when we're working on the selection process. And so if you meet these eligibility requirements and you listen to this information session and you're ready to apply, here's what you have in store coming down the way. So there'll be an online application for the groups. 1 application per group is required. So not everybody in your group has to fill out the application. And that application will be open until September 26th, 11:59 p.m. Pacific time. And I'll go into more of the details of that application in a little bit. And then the second round will be group interviews. So in between the online application and the group interviews, our selection committee, which is made up of our staff, and advisory committee, which is made up of 7 environmental justice leaders from across the country, will review the applications and select a small group of groups to participate in an interview stage. And at that interview stage, we will ask all group members to participate in the interviews. And so even though only 1 application is required per group in the first part of this application process, we do want all the group members to participate in the interview if you make it to that round. And then finally, in early November, we'll notify groups who have been selected to participate in the fellowship. And then you'll be invited to participate in a virtual kickoff, which will happen in mid-November. And so there's a lot more detail on this application process in a document, a PDF that we have on our website. And also I know Trish is providing in the chat right now a link also to our staff page and advisory committee page so that you can get to know our selection committee a little bit more as well. And so the very first part is the online application. And like I said earlier, it's now open and it closes September 26th at 11:59 p.m. Pacific. 1 application is required per group. And you'll see there's a few different parts of the application. The first section will be basically a review of the eligibility requirements that I just reviewed. So just checking off, yes, I am eligible to participate and to apply in the fellowship. And once you get past that section, we'll ask for a little bit of contact information for the group members, as well as demographic information, which is really helpful for us to get a sense of who's applying. and also to help us with future outreach to make sure that we are reaching a wide, just like, as much a diversity as possible in sharing the application out as well. And then you'll get to a section on 4 key questions. And so these are the questions that Angela mentioned earlier around sort of like really helping us get to know your group, your story, the work that you're doing, and the problem, opportunity, or approach that you're focused on. And so these questions help us get a sense of like your group and individual leadership, point of view when it comes to leadership style, and sort of what you're hoping to gain from the program. But also, I think the one question that I really want to point out to everybody is question 2, which is around the opportunity or problem that's ripe for disruption or harvest. And I think this is another place where the fellowship is a little different than other fellowships in the sense that we're not expecting fellows to come in with solutions. We're not, that's what the fellowship is for. We actually want fellows to come in with a problem or approach or something that they want to explore, and to work with one another in their groups and with the other fellows on like building the actual problem. Building the solution to that problem or exploring that approach a little bit more. So as you fill out the application, you'll be asked to fill out these 4 questions, like I mentioned, and we do encourage storytelling. So definitely use real life examples, share stories of impact and group work that you've done in the past. And you will have the opportunity to submit your answers, either written submissions, video or audio. So again, there is more sort of like tech instructions available in a PDF that Trish is sharing in the chat. And then one last note about the online application, which is that the platform will automatically save your work. So you don't have to worry about clicking something or creating an account or anything to share your work. It will save it, but you will have to use the same computer and browser to access your application again. So in terms of dividing up the load between your group members, there will be one person sort of, I think, probably best to have one person in charge of uploading your application once you're ready. But since it is a collaborative effort, we really encourage you to sort of craft these stories and these answers together. So that's why we're sharing the questions here as well as in that PDF and on our website, so that you're able to sort of offline craft your stories together and then upload them, hopefully in a seamless, no tech problem scenario. But if anything happens, please feel free to reach out to me, and my email address is here as well. And so I think that is all for the application. And I'm actually going to pass it back to Angela to see if there's anything that you want to fill in, Angela, or we'll just open up with to question and answer.
No, that was great. I think we've spoken enough. I'm seeing questions come up already. Trish, thanks for bringing them all together. Let me try to answer some of the questions that are coming up already, and Madhu and Trish, feel free to jump in if I forget something, and then we'll just open it up. I think we have about 10, 12 minutes for the questions. But we're getting a lot of questions about, like, can a group be from the same organization, kind of the group formation. And so, yes, you can be from the same organization, but the idea of the fellowship is to be able to design or reimagine solutions that extend beyond your organization. So for the movement as a whole. And so perhaps your organization is designing something that's pivoting towards the movement, or is resolving something that you're engaged in with multiple other organizations or participants in some way. That could be regional, they could be categorized by region, or it could be, issue-based, and going back to the landscape assessment, right? Like kind of focusing on those areas of energy democracy, environmental health, climate justice, and just transition. If you're all from the same organization, there is a cap on the amount that the organization can receive. So each individual is able to receive in the pilot stage at least 12K per person. And then the organization gets a cap if everyone's kind of applying from the same organization. And that you can learn more about in the frequently asked questions. I think we really are navigating towards folks from different organizations. And when we mean organizations, because I see like, Janae and Eric and others talking about like, what does it mean to be part of an organization? And I think that is really what we're trying to seed in this fellowship, is that organizations are meant to organize, right? And we know that everything is how we organize. And so it doesn't have to be a 501c3. It could be any kind of formation that's coming together. The requirement there is that you do need to have a fiscal sponsor that is a 501c3 to be able to transfer funds. Am I saying that right, Trish?
Yes.
I'm sorry. Yes. And Madhu?
Yeah, right. So there will be sort of just some, there will need to be an organization that's able to receive funds on behalf of the group. And so that whether it is the group members themselves as part of sort of an organization, one of them will sort of like volunteer if you have an affiliate organization, or if you're able to find a sort of like fourth or fifth organization to play that role, but there will need to be a group or an organization that can receive funds on behalf of the group that's working together.
Mm-hmm. Let me see. I think Eric, you had, and Eric, feel free to kind of come offline if you want to explain more, but it's really we're not saying that everybody has to be from like the grassroots movement. We want the applicants to be from the grassroots movement, but you might be working with other sectors, right? And there maybe somebody in your group is in your group formation, but from another sector or from another whole area of work. So I saw you said housing, Eric. Yeah, I mean, housing is a key component, as you can see from, any place that's been hit by climate, in the just recovery efforts, in the way that we, integrate energy efficiency and equity, for example, and, how we actually live in relationship with renewable resources and how we design our housing. So I think that's a great example, but you might, Eric, I don't know if that answered your question fully.
Yeah, Angela, thanks so much for responding to that question directly. I appreciate it. And just to give you a little bit more context, I am working with a small but punching above its weight housing provider here in the Western New York region that has largely built its bread and butter on minor and moderate home repair, but has also managed healthy housing interventions, and works at that sort of space between community development and healthy housing intervention, but hasn't really looked at its work specifically from a climate justice lens until recently. I would say in the last maybe 2 years, but is trying to develop a clearer strategy on trying to think about that with relationship to its work, and has recently brought on a small scale workforce development program that works combined with the Buffalo Sewer Authority to train folks on sewer green infrastructure maintenance and priority CSO management. And so like they're thinking about housing, stormwater management, and healthy housing in particular, stormwater management as a neighborhood intervention. And while that hasn't been traditionally part of a climate justice lens for them, it is clearly a climate justice thing. And I'm trying to help kind of develop that framework for them with them so that they can help engage people, because they do a lot of community planning work. So where's the intersection there between traditional community development planning and this climate justice lens that they're beginning to pivot towards. So I'm trying to, they're also directly in relationship with a community land trust that could be part of this larger intervention strategy. So
Yes.
The way that the application is written, it doesn't speak to that constellation of organizations, but what I see enough there to ask the question.
Yeah, no, one of the problems that really came up clearly, right, is that, first we're always engaged in action. Sometimes that leads to siloing. And then the other thing was that there's a lot of conversation right now around infrastructure. So this is more of the design component. There's a lot of discussion around infrastructure, how to build this infrastructure, what kind of infrastructure best benefits, who's the one building it. And those are questions of scale. They're not just like localized questions. They really are questions of scale, right? You have multi-trillion-dollar infrastructure plans passing as we speak. And so how do we send our communities to be able to be in a practice of design beyond our issue area, to be able to receive and lead that kind of those kinds of infrastructure plans. And similarly, when we're asking industry to close down its harmful practices, we're in a place to be able to design those new practices. And we need that kind of collaborative leadership and design opportunities to do that together, and to practice and make mistakes and fail and then try again. Let me see some other questions coming up. So thank you for that, Eric. You want to answer, Mari, you want to answer Jasmine's question, or Jasmine Butler's question?
Yeah, for sure. And also, I think we're trying to answer some questions in the chat as they come in too. This is a great question because it is a group application. And so questions 1 through 3, well, first off, starting a little bit earlier, which is sort of the person who is filling out the application, the person or persons who is filling out the applications will sort of be asked to provide their own contact information, and then will be prompted to add additional contact information for their group members. We encourage you to do that now. If you're selected for the fellowship, we'll eventually want everyone's contact information, but you don't have to sort of provide everyone's contact information at this moment, but there should be a point that we can get in contact with. So that's the first part of the application. And then when you go into the key questions, so questions 1 through 3, the EJ Movement Fellowship, the opportunity or problem that's ripe for harvest, and the group dynamics question should be answered based on the whole group point of view. So we definitely encourage collaboration on those questions. The last is individually based. So if you are 1 or 2 folks designated as the folks filling out the application for your group, then those questions can be answered from your point of view. And so hopefully that's helpful. And as you sort of like plan how to divide up the work in submitting it as an application.
I think we have another question from Tamara Jones about, she said, are you selecting one group from each focus area or regional representation?
No, we haven't gotten specific in that way.
And so we don't, I'm just looking at the time and I want to make sure that we get to next steps so folks know how to reach back out to us if they have more questions. But we do have a number of questions here about just like the difference between the individual stipends and the group stipends. And so we can talk a little bit about that since I think there's a few here about that. Angela, do you want to take that one? I'm happy to jump in as well.
Yeah. I can start. I think you have more of the details, especially around the organizational piece. But Jesus, thank you for joining. Gracias por estar aquí from Puerto Rico. You know, all of the way the application set up is really a response to what came up in these discussions with the movement and what they needed and what they saw missing. What we looked at fellowships and we're like, you know, the reason that EJ doesn't apply it for those fellowship, it's because it's missing these key pieces. So it's really a piecing together of those and trying to respond to what the movement needs. But when it comes to supporting the resources, we saw it like I said before, relationships are going to be really important. So sometimes people don't even need the funding as much as they need to have access to different kinds of relationships. And some of those can come from like academia, which is the Tishman Center, but a lot of them are actually going to be coming from the movement itself. So I just want to say, as we talk about the financial compensation, the relationship piece is worth so much more than that, right? You're digging into historical relationships, leaders, you know, introductions, coaching sessions, but individuals themselves, we heard, you know, a stipend of $12,000 would allow a leader from the movement to step away from some of their work and actually invest in themselves. A lot of our leaders, when they burn out, they actually transition out of an organization and they leave, even the whole sector. So this is an opportunity for individual leaders to invest in themselves at $12,000 for themselves. For the groups, when we talk about the group prototype, we're hoping that you all are coming together. And at the end of the, closer to the end of the second year, we're starting to like really massage a solution, an approach, an opportunity, a disruption. And that you have up to these 20K, right? Because we're talking about being able to like solve some of the biggest and, most daunting challenges we all face in the movement. And so we want to give people some resources to be able to do that. And this is seed funding that we hope to bring in, and we've already brought in for the pilot from our funding partners and our funding circles, right? Some of those people that were around that circle of the fellow. So that's exclusively for your project and whatever you're going to come out of the 2 years with. And then the organization, we've also heard, right? Like a lot of leaders go to these individual fellowship opportunities, but then the organization of which they are, working perhaps full time or contributing most of their time to is left with a real big gap. And so that work gets pushed aside and that leader has to come back and do that work afterwards. And so that has real impact for the movement. And so we're contributing a small percentage to supporting them, 5,000 to 8,000, depending on, the organization. And you self-identify the organization that you're working with and who you want to be able to contribute those funds to make up for, maybe putting a percentage of another staff member's time or another person to take on the work that you're using time for to develop something for the movement as a whole. Did I leave anything out, Maru?
Oh, no, I think you covered it. And also, in terms of some of the decision making and sort of the conversations we had, definitely with the landscape assessment, but also, our advisory committee has been really helpful in sort of pinpointing the different types of support that fellows would want or need to participate in the fellowship fully. And so sort of going back to one of our values is like accessibility and limiting barriers. And we're hoping that some of these resources help along the way as well.
I see 2 more questions here, and then I think we can go to next steps. So Tamara is talking about how groups are going to be working together. And that's why we're having that second meeting, that virtual meeting with the groups as a whole. Because in addition to like seeing how each cohort works together, and it's one of the main questions in the rubric talks about your group cohesion, how long you've been working, and, has additional questions about, how have you integrated, conflict, storytelling about like your dynamics and how you envision yourselves working together. There's this other dynamic of like building community with the other fellows in your space, and then the contributors that are going to come into the space. And a lot of that came out of the radical reimaginations discussions we had when COVID hit, right? The fellowship was supposed to launch 2 years ago, but then COVID hit, right? And there was like a whole recalibration of like, is this something that movement leaders need right now? Or do they actually need time to like settle in community and then come back to learn from what this incredibly challenging time has taught us and that we continue to learn from? And so that I think is a more exciting part, right? Because if we're envisioning something for 10 years from now, and that's like what all of our conversations and our research shows is that we actually need time for movement leaders to be in community, and not in community to like solve a problem that's separate from like what is calling them to their higher purpose, but to like actually just be in community and do things like healing and learning together. There's leadership mindsets that are happening in the first 6 months. There's a really getting to know each other where if and when we are able to meet together in person, we're actually holding those in different communities. So in a lot of ways, there's a possibility that you may not ever come onto the new school campus because, again, the movement fellowship is very much designed for learning to be with each other and learning about your issues and how to like seed each other in this pilot experience. And then the final question, and then we'll go to next steps, because that's 429. You know, we thought a lot about accessibility in terms of language. And so thanks, Muñeca, see you. And we didn't have the capacity at this moment because it's a pilot and it's the first time we're ever doing this to have the whole application process done in Spanish. But I think if this is more of an accessibility issue, Jesus, I do encourage you to just contact us directly. And I think we'll consider the request. Right. I think we're good. I think we've responded to everyone here. And so in terms of next steps, just want to say thank you for coming onto the call. This is a recorded call. We also encourage you to take the time. The deadline September 26th, and you know how we do. We always wait till like September 24 before we start typing in the application. We're trying to be really generous and like make sure that you're able to submit at the very end of September 26th. But if you have questions, we have another informational session September 14th, 3:30, 12:30 Pacific time. There's also one-on-one kind of phone consultations that Maru has generously kind of put herself forth to take. And so you can have a one-on-one with Maru as you finish doing your application process. Those are limited, so you'll have to like apply soon for those if you want to get into those. And then just like lots of appreciation for all the EJ leaders that have already contributed to you all for making the time. I'm gonna pass it to Trish real quick so she can share some of our social media content so you can help us spread the word.
So activate your networks to also apply now that you know more about the fellowship via social media. Please share, repost. You can post yourselves. The social media toolkit is in the chat, so it's easily accessible. It's via Google Docs. This is the link for the social media toolkit with the details on the next informational and overall fellowship experience. Again, every, I guess, information that we're talked about throughout this informational session is in the chat right now. I just pasted the next informational session registration link. Any questions that should be directed to Maru, the Calendly invite for the phone consultation, and the fellowship's website. I think we'll be able to send a follow-up email with all of these important links, but make sure you please activate your networks, share, repost, post it yourselves. There's a schedule for the postings too. And don't forget to visit our website. Thank you so much for seeing this through with us.
Thank you.